Thank you. I first met Jim Loria. He came to our Morning Optimist Club in St. Cloud and gave us a presentation telling us about Jim's Team for Diabetes, wonderful organization. You'll find out more about it. And he's got so much enthusiasm. So we had a program called Lessons in Leadership, which we modeled after the Roseville Club. We brought in motivational speakers once a month. And we had Jim come in for that, and let me tell you, it was the power of belief. Today's topic is the power of enthusiasm. And he's got so many great stories to tell. I don't want to steal his thunder, but I do hope, Jim, that you do tell us about your experience in the White House with President Reagan. So, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Jim Loria.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Hopefully you can hear me in the back. And Lauren, am I okay sound-wise? Perfect. I wanted to say thank you to you folks for the invite to be here, especially President Chuck and Don Silverta, Terry Moran. You guys have been unbelievable in your communications and setting this up. So thank you very much. And my talk is kind of it's a motivational, I think inspiring. It's kind of a little bit of a life story. It's a lot of it's motivation. I mentor athletes, I mentor kids. If you name a country, pretty much we have somebody that we've helped all around the world. Typically, they're young career professionals coming out of college, trying to find their way in life and such. And I've been doing this for so many years, going back to the 70s, believe it or not, when you had to handwrite a message. And I had people from Germany and Czechoslovakia writing me, and I'm writing them back in that era. And I've always been fascinated with communications. But anyhow, so a little bit about me, so you have an understanding what I'm going to say and where I am today. I came from a divorced family of 8. I was born in Iowa. My mother and father split up when I was about 5 years old. My mother's from Massachusetts. My dad obviously is from Iowa. And my mom decided they ended it. And she put us on a bus, and we drove 2,500 miles, or whatever it was. And we drove all the way to Massachusetts, and we lived in a city called New Bedford. It's about an hour away from Boston. It's very close to Martha's Vineyard in the Cape. And so we grew up very poor. In my home, we had to basically get jobs, raking the yards for neighbors, shoveling snow, doing the leaves, whatever you could do, and whatever money you earned, it went to my mom and helped us live. I mean, I'm a father of 3 daughters, and I don't know, and it's tough. And I don't know how my mom of 8, and she's by herself, and we lived in a housing project. And it was a very, very tough neighborhood. We had curfews at 9 o'clock every night. It was tough. And I went to a vocational high school because I knew college was never going to be in my dreams because of affordability and such like that. And so when I took my wife back, when I got married, I took my wife back to Massachusetts to show her where I lived, and we honeymooned in Martha's Vineyard. If you've never been there, it's an amazing place. And so she cried. She goes, she couldn't believe I grew up in this environment, but it's what I knew. And a lot of times that's okay, And so anyhow, I had dreams. I was always the type of person who had dreams. That's always been in my brain. And I had one that was kind of goofy, and I got in trouble for it in 3rd grade, so I won't mention that one. But in 8th grade, seriously, I got in trouble. I wanted to be a horse, believe it or not. In 3rd grade, my teacher, it was a Catholic school, she asked everybody, she was curious what we all wanted to be when we grew up, and there was a popular show back then called Mr. Ed. And I was fascinated by the horse, and I wrote on my slip, I wanted to be like Mr. Ed. And she called me up to the front of the room. I got in trouble. She called my mom. My mom said I embarrassed the family. And so 8th grade, we went 1 to 8 and we went 9 to 12 is what my schooling was like. In my 8th grade year, my teacher asked, what do you guys want to be? Because we were going to move on to go to high school. And I said I wanted to be a dolphin trainer. I wanted to go to the San Diego Zoo. There was a show called Flipper at the time, and I was enamored with Flipper. So TV has always kind of captured my life. And so when we were in high school, this was a vocational high school, and it was a trade school. So you basically were not going to be going to college if you went there, but you gained a fascinating trade. I would recommend it to anybody. And so I chose industrial design, not that I ended up doing that particular course. And so when I chose this school, it was very demanding. You had 2 weeks of your course trade, 1 week of your academic, and I knew nothing about artwork designing. We had all kinds of, we would design homes, all kinds of things in the design world. And I flunked my first year in school. It was based on a grade level, and I actually flunked the trade past my academic. And I remember going home, crying my eyes out, because I knew what my mother was going to say to me. I go home, and I was the first member of the family that failed in a school year, And I remember my mom looked at me, and she didn't have any sympathy for me. She said, "You're a big boy. What are you going to do?" And I remember sitting over it, and my teacher said, "If you stay back, that's great. You can come back. But if you want to pass, you can. But you had to go to summer school, And so anyhow, I made a decision to stay back. I was going to stay back. So I wanted I said to myself, my teacher's not getting the best of me. So I repeated my freshman year. Well, long story short, when I graduated, they ended up retiring my work desk. Believe it or not, true story. And I graded out at 98 on a scale of 100. I was the third ranked student in my entire school of seniors when I left. And so part of this, when you think of motivation, you think of inspiration. I thought that was the first step in my life that I realized I could accomplish something. My daughters gave me grief because they said, "Dad, you were a fifth-year senior. Don't gloat about it, And so, anyhow, here's something that, because I mentor kids all over, especially athletes. So I'm constantly talking to them, And one of the things I always told the guys is every dream comes with a sacrifice. It doesn't matter what it is, where it is. Every dream you have comes with a sacrifice. But the difference is the dreams are free, but it's the hustle. This way I use my sports cliche. It's the hustle that's sold separately, if you really think about it. Dreams are free. I have them every night when I go to bed. You wake up, it's what do you do with them? How do you react to them, And anyhow, so going back, so here I am, I'm in Massachusetts, and I told my teacher in high school, when he said, "What do you want to be when you graduate?" Everybody's telling them, "I'm going to be an electrician, I'm going to be a welder," and all this. I remember standing up and told my teacher, "I'm going to work in the National Hockey League." And he was like, "What? The National Hockey League? Like, who would have thought? You're this high school student. This is like a dream well beyond its scope." And I'm telling him that, So sure enough, I get a job offer in my high school year. My teacher said, "Jim, you've got an amazing skill. You've learned so much." He got me a job. I was going to design shower curtains, is what I was going to do as a senior high school, 18 years old. I was going to be paid $11 an hour in 1974. Picture that. When the minimum wage back then, I think, was $1. I was going to be paid $11 an hour. I had to work 3 to 11. My school got me out in April. My teacher let me go in April. I went to work the next morning. This was in a factory in Fall River, Massachusetts, and I quit the next day. And I went back to school, and my mother gave me grief. My teacher thought I was a kook. And I showed back up at school, and I stayed in school until the last day because I loved my teacher. And I didn't want to leave. And that's when I realized I've always been that comfort zone guy who didn't like to go out of it. And all of a sudden, while I'm doing this talk of, I'm going to work in the NHL, my mother was so mad at me at the time. I hate to say it, my mom passed away, and I know she's looking down at me going, "Jim, stop it." So sorry, Mom. And so I said at the time that I was going to work in the NHL. And so I've always been this communicator, this writer who loves people. And I was fascinated by a hockey player in Canada. He was 15 years old. I was 18. And he was like this phenom player. He set records. He was unbelievable. And I wrote him a letter and told him I was a fan of his and I was following him. And this young man wrote me back and thanked me and gave me his newspaper subscription. It says, "Here, you can read about my team." And so I ended up following this young man in Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario, Canada, as he wrote me and I wrote him. And he said, "Jim, why don't you come up and watch me play? My mom and dad want you to come up to Canada. You could stay with us for a week." So I go up. I saved all my money. My mother let me save the money instead of giving it to the family, and I chose to fly to Sault Ste. Marie. And when I was there, I saw him play 3 games in 1 week. And when I went home, I said to my mother, Mom, I know what I'm going to do with my life. I'm going to work in junior hockey, which is an amateur level league where the players are scouted and they basically have a chance to be drafted by the big leagues. And so there's Canada, and now there's in the US, there's hockey leagues and so forth. So I made a decision I was going to do it. So then, you know what I did? I subscribed to 20 newspapers, all these teams in Canada. I subscribed to every one of their newspapers. They were coming to my home, and my mailman hated me because a lot of times they were back ordered. There were days out, they all came in brown paper, like wrapped up, you know, and I would get like a sack of 40 newspapers bundled up at my doorway. And the mailman had to have hated me. And I would sit there and I would read every one of them. I read stories on players, like comments from coaches, the game reports, all kinds of stories. And I was computing all this together, creating scouting reports. If anybody here ever hears of a Mel Kiper, who was an ESPN football analyst, I was Mel Kiper in 1970s. And so sure enough, I was writing scouting reports and sending them to every NHL team. And I'm 18, 19 years old, and I'm telling them all about these players that they're going to draft. And gentlemen like Scotty Bowman, who's a famous hockey coach, Montreal Canadiens, Scotty Bowman and all these people from the NHL were writing me in New Bedford, Massachusetts, and going, who are you? Where are you getting this? Don't stop whatever you're doing because we love your information. So I thought, wow. So I started sending my reports to the Boston newspapers, the Boston Globe, the Boston Herald. And the Boston Bruins beat writers were using my name in quotes when the players were being drafted by the Boston Bruins, And so, sure enough, I'm watching the hockey news, and there's a team in Calgary, Alberta, that moved to Billings, Montana. Speaking of Montana, so I'm in Billings, so I wrote a letter, a 10-page letter to this gentleman who was the general manager, and I told him who was going to make his team and why. It was 10 pages. He phones me up at my home in New Bedford, Massachusetts, and said, Jim, I don't know you, but he goes, I'm amazed with what you wrote. You got the enthusiasm I like in a person. I would love to hire you. Can I fly you up to Billings? My mother knew nothing. I didn't tell anybody in my family I was doing this. And every day, this is the sacrifice for the dream, because every day I read those papers. I computed things, not that we had a computer back in the 70s, and I wrote all this, and I had my own way of computing what players were worthy of being drafted. And here's my mom again. Okay, so I subscribed to Canadian French newspapers in Montreal and Quebec City. My mom was born in France, and my mother would sit at the table and interpret those French newspapers for me. And I would handwrite, hold on, Mom. I was trying to write down what she was telling me. This is a true story. So anyhow, I'm in Billings, Montana for this weekend. I'm working at Sears Roebuck in the catalog department. I rode a bike to work every day. We were so poor, I had no car, no license. I rode a bike 6 miles to Sears Roebuck every day, worked in the catalog department, and I told the gals that worked there my dream was going to be to work in the NHL, and everybody had a party for me when I flew to Billings, Montana and accepted this job. I was going to work in hockey finally. And this was for this junior hockey of Canada, even though we were in Billings. So here I am in Billings, Montana, and I rode a bike to work. And I lived 6 miles. My boss was mad at me. He couldn't believe I was stubborn enough to ride a bike. And I said, Bob, someday somebody's going to pay me to ride this bike. It was my motivation. And I'll flip ahead, because I went and I lived in Canada 2 years after the fact. I was brought into Canada to work in the Junior Hockey League. And we had a tournament. My team won the national championship in Canada in this year. It was 1979. It was called the Memorial Cup, where the games were broadcast live around Canada. And the sponsor was CCM, of all people. It was the bike company of CCM. And it was on a snowy day, and the VP of marketing happened to be in my office. He was there for 1 week, and it was a blizzard. It was like 20 below Celsius. And this gentleman kept walking in, and he said it word for word, who's the idiot who's riding a bike every day? Because he could see snow and mud, and my office was dripping wet with my bike tires. And so I said, that's me. And he asked me to go outside one day and ride the bike and prove it. And he drove his car, and he followed me for about 2 miles. True story, and he offered me a contract to be the official spokesperson for the CCM company of Canada. I was going to ride up one of their outdoor mountain bikes, and they gave me coveralls, $10,000 to do this, to be their spokesperson. They were going to pay me to ride their bike. He thought I was Canadian, and I was not. And when it came to the point of the application, he found out I had no social insurance card. I only had our American version of it. He had to let me go. And so anyhow, I did get paid to ride the bike at one point in time. So anyhow, you know, when I was in Canada, I had 5 NHL teams offered me a job because they were coming to our team. We had 3 #1 draft picks on our team that year. And the Washington Capitals, a gentleman named Roger Crozier, he was in charge of their first pick in the draft. Roger was in our city like multiple times, and he actually fell, I'm not going to say in love, but he felt there was a connection between the two of us, and Roger wanted to hire me. He says, I want to bring you to Washington, Jim. There's something about you and your enthusiasm. So I'm 24 years old, and he offers me a contract to work with the National Hockey League, and I'm 24 years old, and I accepted the deal to be his personal assistant. He was the assistant general manager. He's one of the great goaltenders of all time. He played with Gordie Howe in the Detroit Red Wings. So I'm Roger's personal assistant in the National Hockey League for the Washington Capitals. I called my mom up because I told my mom when I flew away to go to Billings, I said to my mother, Mom, I'll be in the NHL in 3 years. True story. I said to my mom exact words, I'll be in the NHL, Mom, in 3 years. Now, I've been in this business for 40-some years. I've worked in the amateurs for about 20 of them. I don't know a soul that's ever gone from junior hockey to the NHL. I don't know it. I don't even know if it's a record. And here I was 3 years into my life, and the Washington Capitals, amongst 5 teams, offered me this job. And so I'm in Washington, D.C. with the Capitals, and I had to go get a car license because Roger says, I'm not hiring you unless you get a license and a car. And so I did. And so here I am in the big leagues, and every day at 9 o'clock, which I didn't realize was going to happen, Roger says to me, every morning, Jim, when I'm working here, because he traveled a lot scouting, he says, you and I are going to meet at 9 o'clock in the morning, and I want you to give me an idea on what's going to make the Washington Capitals a better franchise. And I sat there going, what do I need to worry about that for? I'm just this little worker guy, you know? And I knew deep down it was because he wanted to challenge my mind. He wanted me to think out of the box. He wanted to teach me how to think, you know, because I was that comfort zone guy, and I knew I was, and he knew it too. And so I realized in these experiences, I learned the word tough love. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but I learned what tough love was at a young age. At 25, I'm with the Capitals, and I'll give you a couple moments of my first year working in the big leagues, and all of a sudden I was also helping the PR department. So I wrote press releases, I wrote publications, all kinds of things, the press notes when all the broadcasters came to town. I was the guy that fed them the information about players. And so sure enough, at about 3 months into the hockey season, 1980 year, the Washington Capitals, Roger pulls me into his office and says, Jim, we got a problem. I said, what's the matter? He goes, my owner wants to fire you. I said, what? He goes, Abe Poland right now, who's our owner, is not happy. He's been getting yelled at and screamed at by the media. They can't believe. They want to know who's this amateur who's writing all these informational pieces about the team. And Mr. Poland was embarrassed. I said, who's complaining? And Roger says, he goes, the Washington Post. And all these people are complaining. The USA Today, you know, the Toronto Star. They've been complaining about this person's handwriting for the Washington Capitals, and that would have been me. So Roger says, I either have to do something with you or he wants me to let you go. And I'm like, and I was kind of panicking. So Roger comes to me a week later and says, I got a deal worked out for you, Jim. I've got a PR agency in D.C. I need you to go to. For 30 days, I'm trading tickets out, and I want you. Now, we lived in Maryland. That's where our team was based, even though we used the words Washington Capitals. And Roger says, I have an agency in D.C. I traded tickets out for. This gentleman's going to teach you how to write. And it was a public relations agency. So for 30 business days, I would drive in my lunch hour, and this gentleman would sit there while I ate lunch with him, and he would teach me how to write. And I never forgot that lesson, even though I grumbled under my breath when it happened for those 30 days. And when I mentor kids all over, I'm always telling the kids, if you got sons and daughters or grandchildren, and they're ever in high school or going to college, I would tell you to tell them two things. Take a class in writing and take a class in speaking. Every job you have in this world, you speak, you present yourself, and you sell yourself. And I tell my kids who I mentor, you could be an athlete, you sell your coach. You could go to school, you sell your teachers. Teachers sell your the students. Anywhere, and they always laugh when I say, when you try to find that date, you're selling that person as well. I get $1 every day for what I sell, which is a client. You know, and everybody in every relationship and every job you sell, verbally or handwriting or in some way, shape, or form. And I learned it from watching my daughter. She took oral interp in high school because she heard me talk about speaking, and she was very shy at the time and was not comfortable going in front of anybody. And when you do oral interp, you're on your own. It's theater-based, but you are on your own on a stage interpreting some form of art. And so I've always told kids those two things, writing and speaking. So here I went through that and everything changed. My writing got better. I learned the word redundant, and it changed my life, the words of using redundant words. And so that went through, and all of a sudden about 2 months later, I get called in. Roger and I had our 9 o'clock meeting, and this time when I had it, he shut the door behind me, and I never realized the door had ever shut before, but this time he kicked it shut, and he was so mad at me, and I'm 25 years old, and all of a sudden he said, Jim, we got to talk this out. And I sat there and I thought, okay, no problem, and all of a sudden he said, the reason why that door's shut is because I'm not opening it, and you and I are going to talk this out. And he says, I'm going to ask you two things, and I want an honest answer from you, or this door will never open. I said, and I sat there like with a deer in the headlight look, you know, and he looked at me while he's shuffling papers. This is a true story. And he says to me, and every word had an F and a K at the end of it with 4 letters. And he said to me, what do you want to be in your F life? And he looked at me and he paused and he said, so think of this, guys. This is what he said to me. Do you want to be someone or do you want to be somebody? And that door won't answer until you give me the right answer. And I sat there and I'm like, what the heck, you know? And I said, you're serious? He goes, I'm deadly serious, Jim. I've had it. He goes, I want to know, what do you want to be in your life, someone or somebody? And I sat there looking down, like I had that look in my heart was beating 100 million miles a minute. And all of a sudden I looked up, I said, okay, Roger, I got my answer. He goes, what is it? I said, I don't know what you think it is, but I'm going to tell you what I think, and I hope it is, because this is what I want to be, is I want to be someone. He goes, really, you want to be someone? I looked at him, and I said, I sure do. He goes, hold on a minute, Jim. He picks up the phone, he calls the operator, and this was the first year we were just getting into mascots, and he picked up the phone, he called the operations boss and said, so-and-so, bring me the mascot head. And all of a sudden, I'm sitting there, and this gentleman comes walking with this big roundish looking head, you know, and Roger says, stand up, put it on. And I said, seriously? He goes, yeah, put it on. I said, okay. So I'm putting his head on. He goes, I want you to use your hands and tell me what you see. And I'm standing there. It's like, you ever drive through a restaurant, you know, the drive-through restaurants, they have that muffled sound sometimes, you know, and I'm standing there like kind of a muffled voice, and I said, I can only see straight ahead. I'm using my hands. And I said, that's what I gave him my answer. I said, I can only see straight ahead. He says, take it off. And I took the head off, and he says, that's my point, Jim. He goes, you had the right answer. I said, did I? He goes, you know what, Jim? He goes, let me tell you something. He goes, your problem is you know what's over here on your left right now? Marketing. You know what's over here on your right? Public relations. You know who's up above you? The community relations department. You know what's below you? Promotions. He goes, you don't give a damn about any of them. You worry about you. He goes, you know what, Jim? He goes, I'm going to tell you right now, he goes, wherever you go in your life, you're going to need the marketing department, the PR department, the community promotions. You're going to need every one of them to make you become someone. Without them, you're not. He goes, you'll be somebody. He goes, here's what's going to happen for you. He goes, I'm not even going to say next 30 days. He goes, for the next whatever days I tell you, you're going to go to every one of their meetings, and you're going to bring a notebook and a pen or a pencil, and you're going to take notes forever. Whatever they say, you're going to listen. You're going to sit in their meetings and take notes. And if I find out you complain about it or whatever, he goes, I'll let you go. You won't stay. But I want you to do this, and I'll tell you when to stop. I went for about 2 weeks, and I grumbled under my breath on that, but I never said anything. I was not negative, and I went through that experience. And about a year later, when I left and I got this job, I remember calling Roger, and I called up a couple other people and thanked them. It was the best thing that ever happened to me, was to go through that experience. It woke me up. And so here I am, guys. I'm in Washington, D.C., feeling comfortable now. I'm in my year 2, and it's 1982, and I thought the one thing I'm missing in my life, I had my dog. My dog Bogey was his name. Bogey Charles was his born name, and he was my life. But I missed that one other person, that other person that could be that life partner for me. And I thought to myself, I'm going to let my heart open up, and if it happens, great. And this is a true story, guys, and I wrote a blog about this. So here I am in Washington, D.C., and all of a sudden, we had a gentleman who had a special need, and he was our mailroom director, and I was very close to him. In our franchise, my owner had the Washington Bullets, now the Wizards, the basketball team of the NBA, the NHL, and we also were a major concert venue called the Capitol Center in Landover, Maryland. And we would get literally 500 to 1,000 pieces of mail a week. And this gentleman named Stewart, that's what his job was. He sorted mail basically for the owner every day. And Stewart was sick, and I felt bad for him. And we had the All-Star game coming to our building. This was the National Hockey League All-Star game. And I was one of 3 people my owner asked. Now you can see how I was kind of graduating up the ranks here. He had asked me to be one of the 3 people to basically help orchestrate this National Hockey League All-Star game. I was publications, writing, and so forth. And so I decided on this one Saturday, I don't know what made me do it. Stuart was sick, and I thought, I'm going to go to the office, work on the All-Star game, and I'll sort Stuart's mail out. So I go there, and all of a sudden there's like piles and piles of mail, and I'm going through all the sorting. And I took all of the mail from my boss, Roger, and all of the mail for the PR department, and I brought it back to everybody's desk. And all of a sudden, when I got to the PR department, there's one letter out of all the stack, and they were about that thick, had no name on it. It just said, "Attention, Public Relations Office." I thought, oh, I'll write this person and see what they want. So I opened it up. It's a young girl, Gustavus College in St. Peter, Minnesota, wrote a letter wanting to know how she could get into writing, be a journalist writer for an NHL team. She was a nursing major, and she wanted to change nursing and become a writer. So I hand wrote her a letter on Capitol Stationery, told her everything about, here's what you need to do, contact so-and-so with the North Stars. You could use my name. I knew them well. Tom Mees was the PR director. And I sent this letter off to her. Then I went about my business and did work for the All-Star game. About a week later, I got a thank you letter from this young girl, and she said, wow, you're the only one that wrote me back out of 21 teams. I didn't know this, and she told her mother that she said, Mom, someday I think this person and I are going to get married, and true story, guys. I wrote a blog, and so it's publicized. So anyhow, about a month later, she decided, well, I shouldn't say she, my condo where I was living a mile and a half from the building where the Capitol Center, my owner of the condo decided that he was going to sell it, and he starts painting the condos without telling the tenant. And I had my dog in there, so I come home one day, and all of a sudden my dog's got white splotches of paint all over his body, and thankfully, I was one of these guys, if I went to a store, a convenience store, whatever the change was, I'd put it in a jar. I had my version of a piggy bank, and so I decided to take Bogey, and we went outside because he was all painted up, and we go walking by, and there's a payphone by the pool. And I thought, okay, and I had this girl's address. I thought, I'm going to give her a call. She thanked me, and I thought I'd give her a call and thank her and see if she's, following up on my letter. So I go back home, I took all these quarters out, and I run down to the pool with my dog, and I'm inserting quarters into the payphone, and all of a sudden the operator comes on, and I said, I'd like to make a person-to-person call to Wendy Sampson. I gave her the address, and so the woman connects me on, and all of a sudden the phone answers, and it's her brother, and so the operator is the one who introduced me. She said, we have a person-to-person call for Wendy Sampson from Jim Loria, and the guy yells, Wendy, it's that guy from Washington's calling you. And all of a sudden she comes on the phone, and she's got her boyfriend in the house. They're going to go out to a movie, and I'm standing at a pool area talking to her on the phone. We talked for an hour and a half, and the operator interrupted me and kept saying, please insert coins, please insert coins. And so when I hung up, I called my mother collect because I didn't have any more coins. So my mom answers the phone. I said, Mom, I got to talk to you. I said, I got to be honest with you. I got to tell you a story. I said, about this girl. I need you to be aware of it. And I said, you may not like it, but I said, somewhere down the line, I think we're going to meet. And I wouldn't be shocked if we get married someday. My mother's like, what? I said, Mom, I'm telling you, after I spoke to her, there's some vibe in me that says that I think we're going to get married someday, and I want you to know now. So I started writing this girl, and she wrote me every day. We wrote letters to each other for 7 straight months. And my owner gave me the week of the All-Star game off. After that game ended, he gave me a week off. And of all odd things, the date was February 13th was the first day off. It was a Saturday. And so Wendy and I made a decision we were going to meet on that date, that she was going to fly to Washington. And so the month prior to that meeting, I said to her, let's go out at 9 o'clock at night, my time Eastern, or 9 her time Central, 10 Eastern. You make a wish and I'll make a wish. We'll mail it to each other. And when we meet, we'll open up our wishes. But we have to synchronize the time, look up into the stars. You mail me your wish, I'll mail you mine. And sure enough, we got each other's wishes and so forth. So the day we met, and I'm telling everybody in the office that I was going to propose to her, and I hadn't met her or seen a picture of her, but I was going to propose to her. This is your power of believing, okay? And so everybody in the office now thought I needed to be checked up by a doctor. They thought I was they couldn't believe. The girls are going, Jim, you can't do this. You don't know what she's going to kiss like. You know, there's a physical part of the world as much as there's a writing world. You did well on the writing, but there's this side. And I said, don't worry about it. I'm trusting my heart. Well, players were coming to our office, and they're like, Jim, they couldn't believe I was doing this. And then we had this French-Canadian player, Pierre Bouchard, who was like a legendary Montreal Canadian player. Pierre is yelling at the women in the office, going, Jim, don't trust those ladies. You listen to your heart. Listen to your heart. And so I did, you know. Anyhow, long story short, when Wendy and I met, I knew we were going to, the anxiety of this, you know, I knew what I was going to be doing. So I called her mother the week prior, and I asked her mom for her ring size. And her mother answered the phone. And all she said to me was, oh, my God, pause for about a minute. It felt like an hour. And she said, you're serious. And I said, yes, I am. She goes, you really are going to propose to my daughter? I said, yes, I am. And she gave me her ring size. And so I did. So anyhow, when we first met, you know, I got her wish and she got mine. I took him with me and I put him under the couch and I set the alarm for midnight, which became Valentine's Day, February 14, 1982. And when the alarm woke us off the couch, I got on one knee in front of Wendy and I said, I said, I want you to open my wish. And she looked up and she's sitting on the couch up above me and she opened it up and all it said was, will you marry me, on the wish. And she looked at me and she gave me one of those, oh my gosh. And she said, wait a minute, hold on, open my wish. So I opened her wish and all it said, this is a true story, all it said was, will you marry me? That's all her wish said. And that's how we got proposed and married. And so we got married and we've been together 41 years with 3 daughters and 5 grandchildren. So the power to believe. So here now, I have 2 children. We're in Washington, D.C., and I'm getting kind of tired of the fact that we played through Christmas and Thanksgiving and Easter, and hockey's a September to May sport. And it took up a lot of, you know, just a lot of time, and I made a decision I was going to leave. And so this is the motivational story now. We switch over to motivational. So here we are in Washington, D.C., and I made a decision. I told Wendy that I wanted to leave and become a normal dad. My wife was doing so much. She was an at-home mom, bless her heart. And so we made a decision to leave the Washington Capitals. Wendy was from Richfield, Minnesota. Her family's in the Twin Cities. And we made a decision to leave the Capitals and we would come to Minnesota without any job. And so here I had done all these things, let me go back one other step. Larry King, if you've ever heard of Larry King, the famous broadcaster, radio, television host, Larry was our intermission host of the Washington Capitals when I was there for my 5 years. And Larry met with me every game. Larry's ritual was I had to have nachos with him at every home game for 5 years. And so I had that man's mind. Larry would tell me stories of all these famous people he had talked to, prior to coming to the arena. And I'm sitting there 25, 6, 7 years old, and I got Larry King every night sharing memories with me, And so my owner was fascinated by the Olympic of 1980 that won that Olympic medal. And he wanted to meet those guys. And at the time, it was difficult because all these players, Neil Broughton, who played for the North Stars, they were playing pro hockey. They were all over the world, and you couldn't really unite that group. And so my owner and the hockey general manager at the time, David Poyle, made an agreement with the USA Olympics to have the Olympic team of '84 come to the White House. Basically, we were going to have Mr. Reagan take the first shot on goal. And so at the time, Nancy Reagan, as the first lady, her big mantra was she loved the Rose Garden. She was really acclaimed as the first lady that really beautified the Rose Garden. So my owner nominated me to be the person to kind of go to the White House for a week and basically kind of babysit this job, because the NHL brought in a company from Canada to basically build this makeshift portable fake ice. It was going to be on the Rose Garden. So every day, Nancy and Barbara Bush were always out there watching this, being built, and also the press secretary and all these Secret Service people were out there, and I was out there kind of keeping my distance of being a nobody, and everybody called me the hockey guy. That's what they all knew me as, the hockey guy. And so finally, on the day this was going to take place, the deal was Mr. Reagan was going to take the first shot on goal. The Olympic goalie, Bob Mason, was going to be on the ice in uniform, goalie pads, and Mr. Reagan was going to take the first shot, probably about from here to that wall. That's about how far it was. And so the morning of the event, one of the Secret Service guys came to me and said, hey, he called me the hockey guy. He said, I need you to come into the White House. The president doesn't even know how to hold a stick, let alone shoot a puck. And could you help him? And I said, what? He goes, yeah, we don't know. Nobody knew anything about hockey back in 1980 at that point. And so I had a left-hand stick and a right-hand stick with me and a couple pucks. So I said, sure enough. So I go walking in, and I'm probably in about the carpet to the door, maybe 5 yards in this beautiful area of the White House. And out of nowhere, here comes Mr. Reagan and George Bush Sr., and they had a delegation, I think it was from Iraq, that was with them. And all of a sudden, the gentleman from the Secret Service Department introduced me to Mr. Reagan and said, here's a hockey guy. So I asked him what stick he wanted to use, So Mr. Reagan took one of them, and so he's on this beautiful marbled floor, and he's trying to stick handle with the stick and a puck, and next thing you know, he walks over and he pokes George Bush into the wall, and all of a sudden, like in hockey world, there was like a checking moment, and he checks him into the wall, and he starts laughing, and this, I say this event because I learned one thing, and it taught me a lesson. I've always been a foundational building guy, and I learned that as busy as your life can ever be, take time to laugh. And I learned this from Jim Valvano, who's the famous ESPN, when Jim died, I worked with his wife, Pam, on a couple projects, and I remember Pam gave me his famous ESPY speech, about don't give up. And it's just something that you got to learn to laugh. And Mr. Reagan, in that one moment, the way he laughed, and he asked George to, take a stick, and the two world leaders were going around this room, puck handling, and the next thing you know, I'm being called with Secret Service. We go out of the White House, and they wanted me to go with them, and they went to a kind of a Hobby Lobby store, and I'm in the back seat of this car, all mummed up and not saying boo, and finally I had the courage to ask these two Secret Service men in the front seat what's going on, and they said, we trust you enough, we'll let you know, but you can't say anything, and I'm wondering what's going to happen, and they said, the president wants to hit one of the media members with a puck, and he wanted us to make a hockey puck, and they didn't know how to make a hockey puck, nor did I. And so we go to the store, and they're asking the first gal they met at the front counter, how do you make a puck? And the woman showed them, like, they bought like little thin canvas, thick sewing needles and string and whatever, and so anyhow, we go back to the White House, and finally I was asking him before we got back, like, what's going to happen? They said, Jim, you can't tell anybody, but Mr. Reagan wants to hit Sam Donaldson. He was his nemesis at the time. So then I asked the press secretary, I said, what's all going to happen here? And so he's showing me his press chart, and all of a sudden they had Donaldson behind the net. Sure enough, he's behind the net. And so the event goes on, and the president takes this first shot on goal, and he scores, and he's celebrating this goal, and all of a sudden, he took this makeshift puck that one of the women in the White House made for him. He takes it out of his sport coat, and he pops it on the ice, and he whacks at it. It's a windy day, and everybody's not knowing what's going on, because it was a photo op. It wasn't a speech. It was a photo op. And all of a sudden, he's yelling to Sam Donaldson. He's going, Sam, Sam. And some of the guys are poking Donaldson. He turns and gives him a De Niro look, like, he goes, "You talking to me?" And he's going, "Yeah, I wanted to hit you with a hockey puck," and he's blowing them off and walking away, and I'm sitting there. It's like unbelievable to be part of that, but I learned that's the thing I came away from the whole event was you got to learn to laugh. So here I am, guys. I'm in Minnesota. We're in Eagan, Minnesota, and I'm trying to find a job. And I found out what a college degree matters because I never went to college. And not one person would hire me. I got turned down everywhere we went for 7 months, and finally every dollar I saved dwindled to nothing. My wife and I moved in with her mother-in-law, or her mom, my mother-in-law. So we're living in Minneapolis, and nobody would hire me. And everybody said, "Jim, you don't have a college degree. How do I hire you? Great resume." I got turned down over and over. And if anybody knows Dave Mona, tell him thank you. So the last ditch effort, I saw Dave Mona and Associates. Dave was doing public relations work for the big league teams in town, and he was on with Sid Hartman on the radio show. And so I thought, wow, there's a connection. I'm in sports. Dave's in sports. I'm assuming this will be a great hiring moment. So I meet Dave Mona, and Dave looks at my resume. He's like, "Oh my gosh, Jim, this is very impressive." He even applauded what I had done. And he said, "But I can't hire you." And I'm like, "What?" And he said, "Jim," he goes, "I'm in the sales business. We sell clients." And he, swear to God, he said word for word, he says, "Your resume says you can't sell a French fry," is what he said to me. He said, "Get some experience. Come on back. I'd love to hire you in a couple of years." So I walked out of his office. It was about 1 p.m. There was a McDonald's down the street. I was starving from lunch, and I decided to pull in and get a burger, fry, and a soda. And I'm driving my car back to my mother-in-law's house, and all of a sudden I thought of the words, "You can't sell a French fry," as I ate a fry. And I uttered a curse word, and I threw the whole bag of fries out the window. And all of a sudden, one of them hit the window, and it bounced back into the car, landed into the dash. That I didn't know it. For 2 days or 3 days later, I saw a molded French fry sitting in my window. And I went, "Dang it, there's that French fry again." So I picked it up and I threw it out, and I went to McDonald's and I taped one. Every time it got moldy, I taped a French fry in that window. And that was my motivation while living in Minnesota. Nobody would hire me, and my wife's like, we're like sitting here like, what are we going to do? I had no job. I'm 30 years old. 2 kids, no life insurance, no auto insurance, nothing. And Bob Utek, bless his heart, from Let's Play Hockey, Bob hired me to be his managing editor during the daytime. Bob wanted me to kind of manage his paper while him and his wife could take some time, to get out of the busy working world for a little bit. So I was Bob's managing editor. Bob paid me minimum wages and all that. And all of a sudden, I needed more income. And the only one that would hire me, believe it or not, was the Minneapolis Star and Tribune. So I'm sucking it up. I wrote a blog about this, and I tell the kids, a lot of times you got to shove the ego away. That dream I talk about. So here I am. I'm a Star and Tribune newspaper boy at age 30. And so I got paid minimum wages to do 190 homes. Where the old Met Center used to be, now the Mall of America, that was my district. I was going to deliver in Bloomington, Minnesota. So the day before I started on a Monday, the Vikings were playing, and I went and drove around, and I decided to stop at everybody's homes and introduce myself. And I basically got told no's by everybody, and those who complained to me about the service. I made a dream goal. I learned marketing in this one moment. And the marketing was, I knocked on the door, I asked the questions, and my goal was I was going to deliver the paper at your doorstep for 7 days a week for X number of months, even if it killed me. And I was going to break the Star and Tribune tips record. Not that there was. And then come Thanksgiving, I asked my wife if I could buy 190 Hallmark cards, and I was gonna put them into your house under your doorstep, and I did that, and we received over $4,400 from our newspaper homes, and thanking me. And I learned that's what I learned marketing is, believe it or not. I learned marketing. And so, long story short, because I know we have to move on, but I ended up getting a job in hockey again, and I learned that's how I've started my work. Anywhere I go, I've always gone to the client, asked the questions, put the plan together, and tried to work in that same fashion. So anyhow, so let me go back, guys. I could go for hours, but I had a teaching moment come to me 2 years ago when I was diagnosed. It shocked me. I got diagnosed with diabetes type 1. It's a rare thing. If I know there's a doctor in the house, you don't get type 1 at age 66. You can get diabetes. But my doctor pulled me aside because my body was failing. My organs were failing me. And I went in, and when I did, I was not doing well. They did a urine specimen. And when it came time to analyze it, my doctor closed the door, kicked it shut, sat on the patient's table, looked at me and said, "Jim, we got a problem. You got diabetes, and I think it's type 1. I remember sitting there like panicking because I knew what that meant. Sure enough, I went to the hospital, and they did all kinds of testing on me, and my numbers were so off the charts, they couldn't even calculate it. In the medical world, my numbers were that high. And so they thought I was going to die, basically, and ultimately I didn't. And so 3 to 6 months later, here's me again. I create a foundation. My wife knew I was going to do it from the moment I said I'm getting diagnosed with it, and I created this Jim's Team for Diabetes Foundation. It's a 501c3. I wanted to mention it to you guys here. And so we do things for kids. It's type 1 specific. And so if you get a chance, I know we have to go here, because like I said, I'm sorry, I could go for hours and hours, but there's even more to the story, believe it or not. But anyhow, so I'm a person living with diabetes, and so here I am. I'm helping kids around the USA. And I'm this little guy fighting against all the big boys that are out there, and I'm basically providing free camperships for kids that are type 1. I'm providing scholarships for seniors in high school that are type 1, and I'm providing families an opportunity to help pay some of their medical costs if you got prescriptions and whatnot. So we've been doing this for 2 years now, and so it's just something, it's my hobby. I have another job, but this is what I do for a hobby to help kids with type 1. So anyhow, let me just say one last thing, and I'll stop here. But one of the things I talk to my kids about when I do mentor kids around is the 3 pillars of ability. I'm a big believer we all have ability, but the ability I try to focus on is different than what your God-given ability is, and that is like adaptability, accountability, and dependability. Those are the 3 abilities I talk to these kids that I mentor all over the world. You got to have all 3 to make it in this world. If you're adaptable to your environment, if you're accountable to your job, and you're dependable to producing your results, you'll go anywhere you want. And then the other thing I talked to them about is the most significant decision you could ever make in any day of your life. It's your attitude. And we've all been to the hex of downs and ups and whatnot, but I found this quote that I've told the players over and over and over, and I know they really appreciate it. What I told them is every day, the choice you make in your attitude, it either keeps you going or it cripples your progress. It either fuels your fire or it assaults your hope. And that's a quote. A guy named Charles Swindoll, who's a pastor, had created it. And I was told years ago from a friend of mine who wanted me to know more about Walt Disney, and he was kind of passing the word to me about what Walt Disney was like. This gentleman was actually, he met him, his name is Henry Block. If you ever heard of Henry Block from H&R Block, Henry was an admirer of Walt Disney, and Walt shared a lot of his philosophy with him. And I remember him telling me a story about Walt Disney, and it really touched my life. If you go on Facebook, I have a Facebook page, and I have a quote from Walt Disney on my Facebook page, and it's about dreaming, about about dreaming and believing in oneself and such. So I'm going to leave it at that, because I know we have to skedoodle here, and Terry's giving me the look. So I'll stay late if anybody wants to chat, and I thank you, Terry, too, for having us.
Thanks, Jim. Come out with me. So Jim, thank you very much. A great story. I think of all the lines of the Optimist Creed, and the one I will point out, and there's many that you fit into here, but I think to forget the mistakes of the past and press on to the greater achievements of the future fits some of the things you went through. Now, I do think it's kind of interesting, the two letters they exchanged when they first met. I think that's a pretty incredible story. And I'm thinking you two ought to sit down in different rooms and write each other a note on the lottery numbers and then put those together. Because I think you probably could maybe just have a lot more fun in your speaking career. You could stay in the really nice hotels. But that was really interesting. Thank you so much
You're welcome.
for sharing your story with us.
Thank you very
That's
much,
really
sir.
great.
Thank you.
I have for him, as you know, we give a gift of the Optimist Creed, so enjoy that, and thank you so
very
much for
much.
being here.
Oh,
We
you're
really
welcome.
appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yep, bye-bye.